is our leadership in the United States under threat as other nations are aggressively pursuing and enhancing their own innovation ecosystems? I think we've heard some cause for concern already. First of all, we had the opening remarks from President Crow from Arizona State University. We're facing structural productivity issues in this country. Second, as our own 2018 Clarion Call points out, we are certainly facing challenges in our research and development funding in this country. Today, the United States still leads in total R&D investments in the world, but we know that by the end of next year, China will overtake us. We also know that by the end of next year, they will overtake us in terms of the intensity of their R&D investment. That's R&D as a percent of GDP. So that's a real challenge facing all of us, and I think you're dealing with that on a daily basis. But we're also facing an intense challenge in how we actually fund new ventures in this country. You know, as early as 1995, the United States accounted for about 95% of global venture capital. Today, that's less than 50%. And that's having some real impacts that we're already seeing in the marketplace. We've already heard today, dynamism is down. Young firms are not being created at the rate they once were. In 1980, young firms less than a year old, accounted for nearly 15 to 20% of all firms. Today, that's less than 8%. And so that's a dramatic change in this country. So this panel is going to explore what exactly is happening in the United States and what do we need to do about it. We're going to start with universities. They're one of the crown jewels in our innovation ecosystem. But we know that in addition to their traditional role of training the workforce of the future, universities now have to become the economic development engines in their own economies, regional economies, and where you're located. That's a new role. And to carry out this new role, the necessity to engage and partner with industry is greater than ever before. And while industry is the largest funder of research and development in the United States, it only funds about 1.2% of that at universities. So it's quite low. Ruth, you're playing a very different game, though. You're now investing nearly $500 million annually in research and development funding. That's at a rate that's nearly double what we see in other universities because you're actually engaging industries in a way that others aren't. Nearly 16% of your funding is coming from industry. That's very different from what we see in most universities in this country. And last year, you were ranked #1 in terms of technology transfer and commercialization. That's up from 14th position just less than a decade ago. So you're doing something different at University of Utah, and I hope you can maybe share with us some of the practices you're unleashing on campus, and perhaps some lessons we can learn and scale globally and nationally.
So I think it's a very interesting question how the University of Utah has gotten to this position of a #1 ranking in the Milken Institute ranking on tech transfer and venture commercialization. Not maybe what you expected when you thought about Utah or the University of Utah. So I think it's always good to just put that out there. I'm a relative newcomer to Utah. I've been there for 5.5 years, coming from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And one of the things that I think has led to this kind of success and performance at the University of Utah is some very visionary people a long time ago that I get to benefit from. In the early 70s, the University of Utah started the University of Utah Research Foundation. That research foundation was built with a diverse portfolio of the tech ventures commercialization component, but also a real estate portfolio. Over time, as I look back at that portfolio, it has created a very healthy fund to help and assist with faculty technologies and ideas moving into commercialization. So I am the beneficiary, we are the beneficiaries of some visionary folks a long time ago. I think a second thing that I would point to is some very creative and long-standing relationships with industries that have really lifted and helped the institution. The formation of a company in pathology, an ARUP, the pathology lab, that has stayed a university-affiliated company, that has created an engine that has helped the university in so many ways over time. Innovation through companies like Myriad Genetics, Sarcos, now Recursion, that have really thrived in our environment. Those investments, those ideas that are now bearing fruit are tremendously helpful to the institution. As we look forward, the kinds of things that are going to allow us to keep moving, I think, are slightly different. Moving away from thinking about quantity in our relationships and in commercializing to quality. to thinking of faculty as partner stakeholders in this effort, not as customers in the effort. And what that means then for TVC, our Technology Ventures Commercialization operation, is that we need to be trusted partners with our faculty members and have a level of engagement with the science and the entire operation as it moves forward in a new way. That we need to approach this as an investment with a lot of due diligence on the part of the university, not just let's push through as many patents as we can. And finally, I would think a third area for sort of making us successful and continuing to make us successful is to think about the university leveraging the relationships that we have that can help these valuable ideas move their way into success. And that might be with donors, philanthropy, industry partners, others, but using the university as a whole as leverage for these promising quality ideas as they move in. And there are a couple of other themes that we've heard throughout the day. The ability to move with alacrity, to be nimble, and to have the appropriate infrastructure. Because being able to do all those things means that our TVC group, our tech transfer group, needs to have some different capacity and skills than it has had in the past. So those are a few thoughts.
Well, Ruth, before we move on, I wonder if I could maybe ask you to go a little bit deeper. You talked about quantity versus quality. How do you define quality? What are the characteristics that you look for in those strategic partnerships?
Yeah. So I think it really will speak to those elements that I discussed, and that is quality is going to be when you have been deep in the relationship as a trusted partner. It's very hard to determine that if you're starting with a goal of quantity. We're going to produce as many patents as we can. We're going to push in this very wide funnel. So you're going to have to engage at a much deeper level than with just a quantity focus.
Thanks, Ruth. Mike, one of the core trends that we've been hearing today, and it's actually documented in our Clarion call, it's one of the foundational aspects for our new National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontier, is that innovation is increasingly democratized. A young woman today can start a business out of her home with tools, new business models that frankly weren't available 5, 10, 15 years ago. On the other hand, we also know that the global challenges are so huge, and some of these opportunities demand access to innovation-enhancing, innovation-enabling tools that no one person, no one company, or even industry can afford. I'm thinking of things like synchrotrons, supercomputers at the highest levels. I'm hoping you can maybe share a little bit about some of the ways in which Berkeley Labs engages with innovators and entrepreneurs, and maybe share a story about the innovative model where you were actually spinning in those innovators and entrepreneurs to the labs and sharing with them this national infrastructure to enable their own success.
Yeah, well, as we've heard today, the national laboratories have this broad capability both in facilities and in people, which really drive their science. But the question is, how can we get the most value out of that for industry? And I will say first that generally with established industry, trusted partnerships are the most important. Long-term partnerships are the things that provide value in the university or in the laboratory. But we were looking to how to deal with the following problem. Startups are very important, but the model, as we know from the television program Silicon Valley, the model is for apps that you're developing, right, where you can get money fast in, fast out, and do it quickly. That does not apply for much of the hard technology that the nation needs, for clean energy, for many types of, for biomanufacturing. So you need, on the one hand, these capabilities, and on the other hand, startups can't have that sort of capital. Mm-hmm. So we realized that approach to that, and I give credit to Paul Alivisatos, my predecessor, for having come up with this idea, is to take entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs, usually early career, spin them into the laboratory. So what we do is every year, we've gone through 5 cycles of this at a place called Cyclotron Road. About 150 proposals come in every year. About 6 or 7 are chosen for ideas of people who have a good idea, a concept. It's not ready for venture capital, but it needs to develop as a concept. And they can come in and make a case about how they will benefit from the laboratory, how they will work with the people and facilities of the laboratory. It's a very select group. They've gone through, now it's the 5th cohort. And we just support them for fellowship time and their ability to work at the laboratory, and they get a 2-year cycle to either make that work or not and get to their next level of funding. And it's gone remarkably well. The success rate to getting that next level has been very high through a wide range of things. And it's a remarkable set of both ideas and people. It's also had an unintended consequence benefiting the laboratory, that is to say, itself. That is, they come in and work in our nanoscience center, the molecular foundry. They use all those. Well, they change the molecular foundry because they talk to these bright young people about what they need, and they realize they need new instrumentation, they need new ideas. So many of the highlights of these user facilities are coming out of these cyclotron road entrepreneurs coming in and what they're doing there. So I think we have a benefit in this of being in Berkeley and being in the area, but I think that this is something that, although it has to be adapted to the region, can be adapted, this type of idea can be adapted to many places. Already, of course, Argonne has its version of it, Oak Ridge has its version of it. I think even beyond national laboratories, it's a great idea, and it's working extremely well so far.
Well, you know, Mike, I've had the pleasure and honor of obviously visiting with some of the cohorts at Cyclotron Road, but also at Argonne and Oak Ridge, and so there are similarities, and you've talked about success. Could you maybe share what you have learned, some of the challenges that these entrepreneurs are facing? Because at the one hand, it's a hard technology. As you mentioned, there's not just an app. So there's a lot of bench time, but then there's the marketing, there's the sales. So how's that working out?
Yeah, so I should say the range of things, we have people in buildings, chemicals, electrical storage, electronics, computing, materials, transportation. So this is not just one thing. But what we do for them is they not only work with the facility, work with the people, but they also get very intensive mentorship and training on how to start a business. We have some extremely good entrepreneurs and residents who work with them. They get one-on-one mentoring, and they get exposure to this network of people. So we have the demonstration event they have every year is become a big event in the Silicon Bay area. So the people come out of it and say, I don't know another way I could have gotten such an intense boot camp in how to start up a technology company.
So just one last, 5 cohorts, success. Is the program growing? Is it at a stable state? What's the vision?
Yeah, so it started out, the fellowships were supported originally by the Advanced Manufacturing Office at DOE. Lately we've gotten, DARPA has taken on some, and the California Energy Commission as well. So it's not growing exponentially. In fact, that's not our goal, because I think it's about the right scale to manage. But the nice thing I see is it's diversifying. It's more areas, and I think we have some other opportunities in the future.
Great, thanks, Mike. John, I'm hoping you can maybe help bridge and perhaps even tell a story. Serial entrepreneur, you've had a lot of success starting companies. You've seen some failures with companies. Perhaps riffing off of what we've heard from Ruth and Mike, can you share a little bit about what you see are critical barriers that are facing entrepreneurs today in the United States? What do they need to overcome? Or what's the opportunity space that you see that where a group like the Council and our National Commission can help to address and really unleash this innovative spirit even more in the country?
Every innovation of any consequence that any of the companies I've started has created, it seems to me, has been driven by customer needs. Back in the early 90s, people wanted to do surveys on the internet before very many people had access to browsers. So we developed the ability to parse ASCII text email messages to pull out survey responses from them. At my second company, Customer Sat, people wanted the ability to follow up with dissatisfied customers in surveys. So we incorporated the ability to do case management, link case management to customer surveys, and so you could automatically open and assign cases. That pulled us out of the dot-com bust. So it's a great temptation to be driven by a cool technology. I like to say I started my first company with a really cool technology for which there was no market need. And it took us 6 to 9 months to let go of that idea and swap it for something for which there was a real market need, namely the ability to do surveys on the internet. So start with the real customer need, and that way you know that you're really addressing one. As far as obstacles are concerned, in most ways, starting a company, in my view, has gotten easier in the last 25 years. Software development platforms are more powerful. You can more readily outsource areas that aren't your primary focus. You can develop skills free of charge in some cases online through online courses. You can more easily find investors who are interested in your space and employees, prospects, and suppliers who can help you. There's only one way, in my view, that starting a company over the last 25 years has gotten harder, and that is regulatory compliance. And there's so many ways I could talk about. Just one, worker status law, the detail that you have to go through to justify whether someone is a contractor as opposed to an employee. Entrepreneurs, like any field, have a distribution of those with more skills, knowledge, passion, perseverance, and those with less. No matter how you define the metric of overall entrepreneurship, there will be some at the low end who are increasingly being thwarted in their ability to start their own businesses due to regulatory compliance. And there is no one silver bullet. It's different for every industry. It may be H-1B visa limitations. It may be DOT regulations. I could go on and on. And so the recent increased focus on trying to figure out which regulations here in Washington are the most onerous, I think, is really healthy. And I applaud that effort. It may be the most important agency in Washington right now is OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, that assesses the impact of regulations on business and innovation and entrepreneurship. And so those are some thoughts, Chad.
John, I wonder if you could maybe share some other perspective. I know your deep engagement with MIT, your deep engagement through your business line with Google. So you, small entrepreneur, you have worked with the big men and women in technology to help scale and deploy your efforts. What have been advantages that you see as a relatively smaller entrepreneur engaging with entities that can help you scale and grow, but also what are some of the challenges, and how can we ensure that there is a very positive synergy and engagement between small and large?
Well, I think the most important thing to do before scaling is to ensure that there's a good fit between customer need and product or solution. And I think of the space of customer needs as being invisible, fractal, that is infinitely detailed, and all we can do is test a few points of it to try to figure out where the boundary lies. And once we have found a point where, yes, there's a real customer need, this product or service seems to fit it, that's a test that we need to do and validate before we scale up. Otherwise, we're likely to be wasting money.
Great. Ruth and Mike, not asking you to give away the secret sauce at your two organizations, but going back to what you shared earlier, what would you want to share with this group as we think about how can we ensure the nation enjoys the successes that your institutions have enjoyed over the past 4 to 5 to 10 years and really transforming and becoming these bastions and in some sense these catalysts for innovation? Ruth, would you like to start?
I think certainly one of the things you spend a lot of time worrying about when you're a university leader is the resources that are going to be needed to drive these kinds of innovations. And those resources can come from a variety of sources, but we have to have them in order to be able to continue to compete. And so I think that is probably the number one thing, the investments that are coming from our federal partners, the investments that are coming from our industry partners, and frankly, the investments from our donors and from the institution itself.
One thing that's, I think, a new situation for us, these young scientists in chemistry, materials, all those things, some of them decide they will go take the boot camp in Palo Alto for 6 weeks for free and get a position in data science for one of the companies there for twice what they're making. Now that's good for them, and in some sense it's good for the economy, but it's not serving the purpose we're talking about here of starting up companies rather than just building up the big ones. So we have to give these people something that shows them a way of getting to a company. And that's, I think, what all of us need to be doing more of. And I will also say that a lot of what they get when they do come from this mentoring is exactly what you said. I mean, mostly what these scientists coming in are being told it's about market, market, market. I mean, that is the training that they're getting. Yeah.
You know, I want to take advantage of the remaining time we have. All three of you are involved with or at seeing really the cutting edge of technological innovation in this country. Could you talk a little bit about where you see opportunity for your region, of course, but also for the nation, and where, and in some sense, ought we be investing more to really, to position the U.S. for dominance, supremacy in certain areas? Anyone want to start?
Well, I'll pick up a couple of things just because what I've been spending my time lately on that I think are important for the nation. One is, and Paul Kearns mentioned today, quantum information science is something that we need to do in a much broader way across industry, academics, and laboratories, and that's something that we are certainly putting a lot of effort and time into. And the other is the next generation of microelectronics, and they're going to be, there's a new future there that the U.S. cannot afford to be out of, and it takes broad working from materials all the way up to programming and through systems, and those are both areas that, frankly, we need national fronts, national campaigns on both of those that operate across our boundaries.
Yeah. John, Ruth, any thoughts?
I think for our region, certainly the successes of the past have been very heavily rooted in medical and biotechnologies, and I think that will continue going forward. I think the growth of energy in a variety of forms is also present in the conversation today, is going to be a very important sector for us as well.
I think the biggest red flag for continued growth in Silicon Valley is housing prices. Every community up and down the peninsula has a NIMBY policy. Not in my backyard do we want high-rise towers, and it's okay if one community has that mindset, but if everybody has that mindset, it's going to escalate the cost of real estate. And as a result, we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of companies leaving Silicon Valley. In fact, there's a study that shows that more professionals born in the United States in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, the two counties most closely associated with Silicon Valley, are now leaving than entering the region. There's still a steady stream of folks from overseas who are coming to Silicon Valley, and
But
so
everyone
that
else is moving to Utah?
I was going to say, I think the Silicon Slopes have been the beneficiary of this.
well, Utah, yes, absolutely.
With the 64 sort of tech companies that have started along the mountain range.
The number one state they're going to, I'm sure Utah's high on the list, is Texas. And of course, Texas has average home cost in Texas is $250,000 as opposed to $450,000 in California. It has a lower rate of unemployment and lower cost employment workforce, despite the fact that unemployment is lower. Has a friendlier regulatory environment, and perhaps most important of all, it has no income tax, as opposed to California, which has a 13.3% marginal tax rate, which is one of the highest in the country. So I think all of that gives guidance to any state that aspires to have its own Silicon Valley. Be cautious of these tax and regulatory factors that can make a state unattractive. I'm not suggesting that Silicon Valley is going to disappear at all. I think it's going to continue to grow, but at a slower pace, and there'll be much more growth elsewhere.
Yeah, Mike, please.
Make a point on that. I think from a national perspective, I mean, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and go back there now, and they need some innovation. They need some manufacturing. And the fact that there are many places that this should go on is a good thing for the country. So speaking from Silicon Valley, these things must be carried out all over the country, not just in Silicon Valley. I think for the nation, that's needed. And I think that's actually one of the most important messages is this. And they need to be regional, but there need to be many regional efforts. As we heard about in Milwaukee today, those programs need to go on all over the country.
Yeah, and I think President Crow mentioned that even in some of his opening.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet. Ruth, any thoughts on this issue? Or
I think some of us have enjoyed the growth that has come to us from other places. And I think the dilemma that happens is we also now see this trajectory of increasing home costs and pressure and lots of not in my backyard.
Yeah.
So there are tensions that are associated with it, and the idea that distributing this across the country will be the healthiest way forward.
we just have a few minutes left, and so one area where we haven't touched upon and probably should have devoted more time, it's about people. You know, this panel and conversation was about, from mind to the marketplace. What do you see in your experiences, your organizations, are the critical challenges facing your employees, your partners, and helping them to translate ideas to the marketplace? Anything that we can suggest and to help make that easier? Any thoughts?
Well, I would say just a broad thing in our perspective. I always bring up a slide of Lawrence and Oppenheimer and Bob Wilson and others when they were in their 30s and 20s as they were leading what became the Manhattan Project and the National Laboratories. And our problem now we have is we don't get people into these leadership positions fast enough.
Oh, interesting.
And we're burning up too much time on people. So everything, all of us in our organizations, bringing people earlier in their career to positions of responsibility and leadership and entrepreneurship, I think is something we need to do better.
John?
Chet, as I understand it, your question is how can we accelerate the transition of students from university to the workforce in a productive role?
Or also, yes, I mean, I think that's a valid, but also just how can we instill this mindset that getting the ideas from your head to the marketplace is of value, and for some people that's not natural. Are there things that we could be doing to accelerate and to help that process?
Well, of course, there are going to be experiments, trials, tests with customers, prospects to see what works and doesn't work, and there needs to be plenty of that before you launch or finalize a product, and that's a healthy thing, and that necessarily means a lot of failure because most of those won't be successful.
Right. So comfort with failure, we need to...
Yeah. On the question of accelerating the transition of folks from college to workforce in a productive role, I hate to hark to my own experience from 40 years ago, but I was in a work-study program, an internship program at MIT, working for GE back then in one of their electronics labs, and that was the first time I shook hands with my career as an engineer, and it just let me be immediately productive after I graduated. So in the future, I see more and more of that, and that since the pace of innovation is accelerating, and since what we learned during the ages of 18 and 22 is becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of everything we need to know throughout our lives, because so much more of what we're going to need to know hasn't been discovered yet, I see the 4 years in college sort of evolving to a mix of maybe a shorter period of time, but then a recurring coming back at periodic intervals to be refreshed, and a continuous mix of residential learning, online learning, and real-world work experience like my co-op program 40 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're describing, to steal some of President Crow's words, the experience of a knowledge enterprise and universal learning that is recursive and continues over time. And
yes, and uniquely, and a path that's uniquely determined for each individual.
Exactly. Well, listen, thank you so much, panelists, for your insights. Sorry we have to wrap up so quickly, but really appreciate the deep learning. Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.